record this one to my computer. So, good afternoon. I'm George Steele, and my co-teacher.
Hi, I'm Wendy Schindler.
And we'll talk more about ourselves in a moment, but let's first find out who's all attending right now. So, Kate and Holly, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Okay, I'll go first.
Sure.
I'm Kate. Sorry, Holly. I'm Kate Boone, and as I said, I'm an academic advisor from South Africa, from the University of the Free State.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And Holly?
Hi, I'm Holly McDonald. I am the Campus Advising Coordinator for Training at the University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Great. Good to have you back. And I know that that you talked to this earlier, so I'm glad to see you here again. And it's regret that you're having some difficulties with the internet, but that does happen. So Wendy, do you want to talk a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Wendy Schindler again. I am the coordinator for our TRIO Student Support Services program at Northern Kentucky University, which is in the Cincinnati metro area.
Okay, great. Now I'm George Steele, and I've been helping the college teach these e-tutorials now for about 7 years. So I enjoy doing this, and I'm semi-retired at this point from Ohio State and Ohio Board of Regents. But in both those areas, I was looking at running advising programs. So welcome, everyone. Glad you're here. And so what we'd like to do today, I'm going to share my screen. What I'd like to do is just sort of go through the course, and please stop me if you have any questions, okay? And so I'm going to take that down. And can everyone see my screen then, okay? All right, good. Okay, what I'd like to do is bounce back and forth a little bit between two of these to show you the interconnection of this and see if I can do a little bit better job than I did last time. As far as the course is laid out, as you can see, what we are trying to do, let's go to the last thing first. And the thing that we want to take a look at is a lesson plan. And you're going to be making a lesson plan. And this is an example of a lesson plan that is an example that's tied to an example activity we have within the course. And so what you would do here is just download this. And you can download it by saving it here. And you can click onto it. And when we open it up, this is what the activity that you'll be turning into us at the end of the period of time will be, okay? Well, let me reduce the pause then and get started. And, okay, get a little bit of feedback. My co-teacher.
Hi, I'm Wendy Schindler.
And so, good afternoon, I'm George Steele, and my
It's us.
It's us. It's recording. I don't know where it's coming from. Can someone, let me just do this and let me mute. If everyone could just mute for a moment to see if that might be an issue. Okay? How does that sound? I don't hear it anymore. All right, there may have been a delay going into it, and then we got the feedback, so that's fine. One thing we know about technology, eventually it will go wrong, so don't worry about it. Okay, so this is going to be the Blackboard lesson plan, that Blackboard by Design activity plan that you'll be developing. This is a plan which asks you to first look at what do you want to teach and what are your
Sharing. Sorry, you're not sharing your screen anymore.
I'm not. Okay, well, let's try it this way. We got bumped out of it. There you go. All right, so this is a plan. And what this is based upon an approach called Backward by Design. And Backward by Design, we use it because it's the most commonly used approach to curriculum and instruction, used by most teaching and learning centers in the United States, and I also believe in Canada. And so it's pretty straightforward. When they talk to faculty about it, what they say, okay, what are your goals for your instruction or your curriculum? What do you want students to be able to do in terms of transferring the information they have to new situations? How will they demonstrate understanding, essential questions? Acquisition, what will the participants have to know before they move on? What will they be skilled at? And so the idea is we write as much of this down as we can, and we'll show you how we're going to help you do that. And then the next stage here is evidence of assessment. So they're asking you, how do you know that the students have done all of this? How do you know that they've transferred this information to something new? How do you know they've made meaning in terms of understanding what you're trying to promote within the activity? What are the essential questions? How do you know that they can answer these? And so as we go through this, that's stage 2. And then finally, stage 3, 4, and 5 is where you actually show the outline of how the lesson would progress, what type of content would be used, and what type of follow-up activities might be used in terms of this, in terms of the activity you develop might be part of a larger curricular activity where there's going to be some scaffolding. So you may just do the introductory lesson, and then you'll know that there's going to be additional ones coming down the pike. You may want to do for this activity here just one, and know that there's going to be some that come before and some that come after. That's your choice, all right? And the other thing that we have on here is your name, institution, and email. So as you finish up with this, what you'll end up by doing is that next week at this time, you're going to have completed stage 1. The following week, the end of week 3, you'll have to do stage 2. And then on the last day of the course, you'll be able to turn in stage 3, 4, and 5. And really, once you get these first 2 done, this stage 3, 4, and 5 usually flows pretty easily. Now you'll notice what I've done. We need your name, the institution, and your email address. Because what we have here is a license for Creative Commons. And that means that this is a Creative Commons, that people can share it, your lesson, that is for people have to give you attribution, that you were the ones who came up with the ideas that you put here. And then finally, no one can use it for money. All right, that's a big deal. Because why? Because at the end of the day, what we're going to have you do is to create one lesson. And as you can see, and we're going to get into this a lot more here in a second, but the NACADA core competencies, I'm going to talk about each one of these here. There are over 17 of them. And what we've had people do in the past is each person has created one lesson related to one competency. And this has now been taught 5 times before this particular e-tutorial. So what it means is at the end of the day, you create one and you get to share yours with everyone, and everyone shares theirs with you. So let's take a look at this one. This is competency C3, theory. So what these are 4 different lesson plans, and each one of these you'll have access to at the end of the course. So here what we have is NACADA core competencies, and this one, what they'll look at are appreciative advising, strength-based and proactive group advising, comparing and contrasting the theories. As you see, all of these areas within that worksheet are filled out appropriately in terms of, right here, in terms of what the goals are, in terms of the assessment of evidence, in terms of the summary of the key learning and of instruction, the content that will be used, and then follow-up activities. So let me pause there and see if there's any questions before we get into more detail, because right now I'm taking this at about a 5,000 foot level. So let me just pause there a second. Any questions on this?
No questions on my side as yet.
Okay, good, okay, good. Holly, done? Okay, good. Well, let's go back here and start working then on the details. How's that? So when we work on the details, what we're looking at here is the modules are divided up into sections. And of course, you've already completed the first week. And one of the things we asked you to do is to look at NACADA's core competencies. And part of the requirement was choosing one area that you wanted to develop an activity or a lesson in. So here you see the one that I just showed you, C3. We already know we have 4 activities related to that. We end up by looking at the overall number. Right now, we have over about 60 different activities people have designed for professional development activities. So when everyone in this class gets done, everyone's going to have between 72 and 75 activities to choose from in order to divide an entire advising program if that's what you want to do. Okay? That's the goal. And so as we get into this, and you've gone ahead already and answered the email or the discussion, and we got into the discussion here for this month, this week. Okay. How many of you, why don't you just both tell me right now which activities you're thinking about doing? Holly, which one are you thinking about doing? Can you hear me, Holly?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, exactly. Good.
Okay. I'm going back and forth between two in the conceptual, which is either strategies or the NACADA advising values.
Okay, core values, okay, or, okay,
yeah,
good.
yeah, sometimes back and forth between those.
Okay, and you mentioned the other one would be the approaches and strategies. C4
Yeah.
or C2. Okay, great. Super. And so, Kate, have you thought about which ones would be most appropriate for your situation?
I've picked from the relational, but I'm just still trying to decide which one in the relational.
Okay.
But I'm leaning more towards creating rapport and building academic advising relationships.
Okay, very good. In that case, it would be R2 in terms of
Yes.
the one, in terms of sharing. This one here, R2. Okay, very good. Now, just for an example, let's just do this. Let's go back. We take a look at R2, creating rapport. You can see we already have 3 related there. Building trust, appreciative advising, and 2 on appreciative advising already. If we take a look at some of the C2 ones, core values, no one. So that would be a great addition. The other one was C4, academic advising and approaches and strategies. So we have one on integrating academic advising and career advising, okay, as a strategy and approach, personal philosophy, proactive advising, developmental, strength-based. So what people have been doing is putting out different ones. I'm sharing these with you right now so that maybe what you end up by doing is thinking, well, people have done these. I might want to do something a little bit different so I can add to this, knowing that I have these as a good guide already to get started with. Okay, does that help? Okay, good.
Yes, that helps a lot.
Great. Well, so when we get into this and we start looking at the modules then, what I was trying to do in this first module here on week 1, first week, is to provide an example lesson. So the idea would be is that this example content for the activity, I'm having advisors learn and know the Holland Code. I'm assuming that these are new advisors. And if you're not familiar with the Holland Code, it's a very commonly used one here in the States because it plays an important role. Not only do we use it to help students assess their self-interests and how those interests might relate to academic programs and careers, but we also use it because it is the key way in which going to use the U.S. Department of Labor website, one can search for occupations looking at interest patterns. And so we get into here, and what we're looking at here is an activity where students have to know a little bit of the background of the Holland Code. They also are going to have to know a little bit about interests, abilities, and values, the parts of the Holland Code, and then examples of different type of content that I could use to put in there to make it more multimedia. So the question is this: well, if this is for students, why are you doing advisors? Because obviously, advisors are going to advise with this content. They have to show that they know it. And so I think that as you go down this path, and the reason I mention this is that there's probably a number of activities that you want your students to do that you're going to be training your advisors to do. So what you develop for professional development might also be something that you can just slightly modify and ultimately use with your students. So that's just a thing to keep in the back of your mind as you're going through this. But anyhow, and of course you can use that with any of the ones you download. And I think that mostly when we get into this, a lot of your conceptual and your informational type of categories in the concept of advising probably fall more into that activity, where I do believe that for the most part, a lot more of the relational tends to be more specific to the advising process, just in a very, very rough way. Because again, if you look at the informational, if you're looking at things like policies, procedures, campus resources, curriculum, if you're going to teach people about those topics, you're doing it because you want, at the end of the day, them to be able to work effectively with students. And so expected outcomes of advising, how equitable inclusive environments are. So there may be a little less with conceptual area, but if you're using any type of theory or any type of approaches with your students, you might want to consider that. But particularly when we look at the informational one, is there really anyone in that entire group that you don't want students to know something about? History, mission, vision, values, and culture, possibly to an extent. Curriculum, degree programs, policies, procedures, rules, regulation, legal guidelines. Don't you want students to know about FERPA and the requirements of that? About what are the expectations in terms of use of social media? So you start going down that path, and there's a number of activities. Characteristics need to experience majors and student emergent student populations. Maybe not quite so much that one, but again, that could be used. And what I'm thinking here is that if you look at emerging or special populations of students, one of the things I know that Virginia Gordon used to do, who wrote a great deal about working with undecided students, is she would share with them different characteristics of undecided students and ask students to identify which one they think that most represented them. So if you had a theoretical basis of that, this would be another way of approaching it. Campus and community resources, and how to use information technology. And again, all these would be pertinent. So again, that's just the thing to keep in mind as we go through it. But as we look at this activity for a lesson plan, we want students to engage in this. Wrong one, sorry. If we want students to engage in this, we're doing it in a way that what do we want from them? What do we want to help them understand? And so when we do that, again, what we're looking at here is the initial lesson plan in that area. This activity will introduce, now this is not for students, pardon me, to advisors. This activity will introduce to advisors the Holland theories of vocational type, because we want them and students to know it. I want them to apply the theory to their practice and working with students, to themselves as individuals, and also a variety of resources they can use in their advising practice. So when we look at all of these are the ways we want to transfer the information, apply the knowledge of the Holland module to working with their students as they engage in career exploration, through discussion and reflection, how this theory sheds insight on their particular personality type and how it might impact their advising. You'll notice we have some essential questions here. We have understanding, acquisition, what do I want them to know, and what they'll be skilled at. As you go through this, hopefully everything I have in here is shown in some capacity here. So not only do we have the activity, what they're engaged in, but we also have ways of obtaining feedback that they actually learn it. So the first one is a quiz, and we use the quiz function. And here's one in which all we're doing is asking people to define the different interest patterns. Here's the definition, here's the type, match it. Here's one where they have to apply it. These are different occupations. What would be the strongest type related to that occupation in terms of investigative, realistic, or artistic? Third question, what is your 3 highest Holland codes after you've taken the ONIT inventory? So when we look at these, and there's some other quizzes, and we end up by looking at your short answer responses, you'll notice that we have a number of different ways for training. How would you use Holland's theory of vocational types? Well, if we go back to that module here, and when I show you the example content here, oh, pardon me, wrong one, let me go here. Here. You'll notice that there's a relationship here between what I'm asking them to respond to and the essential questions. Okay? How can you, as an advisor, help students? Describe how you can work with a student. You know, there's a relationship here to these type of questions so that we're getting feedback at these different levels. And so basically what we're doing here is we're using the quiz and the other short response type of examples for this activity to participate and help pull those type of things out to show that the new advisors can understand what this activity is about and we can do it. Now here's a reflection paper for me. Here, again, the essential questions are pulled out and you can see how these are related to this here. Also part of it. And these are two different ways you can do it, and it's really up to the individuals to try it. So if we go back and take a look at some of the content in here, some of the content we pulled together is content that is, and you know, down here on your lesson plan, one of the questions we ask, is it external content? Is it institutional content? Is it content that needs to be developed? And so the content that I had developed was the synopsis of the Holland Code. And that would be this content here. That had to be written, had to be put in here. And so, but I also have external content. I use the ONET profiler, Holland Code personality types, but these all link to external content. So what I'm doing is I'm incorporating external content into here and using it because I think that it is of value. And I'm taking people to a specific point. So I'm showing how this occupation here is related to the interest for realistic. You'll notice here I got the movies in. I've used external content for the movies. And then under institutional content, I used here two examples. Here's one for Rogue Community College, and I like what they've done. Because if you're looking at what they've done, is they have here the Holland Code. You take the quiz they have there, or I showed the other one. And what you can do is you can go into the different interest patterns for investigative. And most investigative majors have a science-backed major. So you're either looking at the natural sciences or the social and behavioral sciences. And when you're looking at the natural sciences, that also means you're looking at a lot of health-related professions. And so you can go in here and you see what they've done is on one hand, they've shown you where this major or the program of study is located on their individual website at their institution. But then they're also giving you to a job site what the definition is. And here's one from ONET. And when we get into ONET, and we go down here looking at this, one of the things we can take a look at is knowledge, skills, abilities, work activities, zone, interests. And all of a sudden we end up by seeing investigative. Occupations involve working with ideas and require extensive amount of thinking. These occupations can involve searching for facts and figuring out problems. And so one of the other things we have in here is for the advisors to actually take the ONET infant profiler. And if you've ever looked at this, the reason I'm using this is because this is the one developed by the US Government Department of Labor. And when you get done with this, you will end up by being able to see a number of institutions or a number of occupations related to your results. And that's where we asked for it. So let me pause there at this point because it's a long one, but I'm trying to show here the relationship between the rubric that we show as an example and also the actual activity that we set up. Any questions on that relationship? Does that make sense? It does. Okay, good. Great. Well, let me just then show you some things that we're going to get hit in this upcoming week to help you develop this. During this second week, the first reading that you're going to have is your backward by design. And again, the backward by design model, as we look at it,
Your screen's not shared.
yeah, let's just pull up another one. Thank you. Appreciate that. Sometimes I'm a little slow. But when we look at this, what backward by design suggests? They want you to define your learning goals. Next step, decide on your assessment. Third step, design instruction. bing, bing, bing. So that last one is 3, 4, and 5. And that's what we'll do. These videos we've embedded in here give you some more additional background in terms of backward by design theory that you can take a look at. Now, what these also show here is how different institutions like Vanderbilt and Yale use these for their teaching and learning centers. So I've tried to make this so that if you like this approach, you can copy and hold on to these type of sites for future reference. And I would recommend that if that's what you want to do. But this explains that process that we're looking at in a very general way. The other one that we do is Bloom's taxonomy. And the thing with Bloom's taxonomy, how many are you familiar with Bloom's taxonomy?
Yes.
Holly, yes. Okay, good. And Kate? Okay, good. You both are. So I'm just going to go over real briefly then what it means for us. And of course, with Bloom's taxonomy, what we were looking at were different levels of more complex thinking, valuing, and psychomotor type of development. And so the first one, the one most used in most college areas, is they spend a lot of time on thinking, the cognitive one. And that's good. I think that's nice. But the other three are equally important and are not as well shared. So that's why it's going to take a little bit of time to go over this. But the idea is that the lowest level is remembering with the cognitive one. And it goes from understanding, which of course is one of the categories here, and then applying, analyze, evaluating, and creating. So how do we end up by helping people go through these different stages of thinking or the cognitive approach in order to have a lesson? So what we really are saying here is we want people to know more than just the knowledge of it. We want them to be able to apply that knowledge, okay? And so when we look at this here, when you get into this section, there's a link here to more issues of using Bloom's taxonomy, which is a good book to read, and also Big Dog and Little Dog Juxtapositions, an entire website dedicated to it. And I would encourage you to take a look at that one if you're interested. And mine's loading slow, so we'll come back to it to see if it ever does load. As we move on here. Okay, I think it does pop up. Okay, here. So this is one that Bloom's taxonomy, the 3 domains, and a good resource for people to look at. But at the end of the day, what we're saying here is that these are nice definitions. When you recall or retrieve previously learned information, information is the lowest level of Bloom's taxonomy. All right, if it's just sharing information, it's nice, but it's pretty low level. Understanding means you have to translate it or put it into your own words. Applying is where you have to use the concept of a new situation, unprompted use of an abstraction. You have to be able to apply it to a new situation. So if I'm talking about the Holland Code, I'm saying this is related to careers. How else might you be able to use this? And that would be taking the theory and putting it in a new situation. Analyzing it is breaking it down and saying, well, what makes this theory tick? Evaluating is saying, well, what are the strengths and the weaknesses of this particular theory? You know, it's great and holistic in some ways, but it's leaving some critical parts of advising out. And under creating is when you take this theory and you build something totally new with it. Okay? And that way is saying, okay, I see how I could use this maybe with my students. And so what I'm going to do is have them respond to it. And I'm going to ask them to interview somebody of an opposite type. And we're going to create this activity so they can see how there are differences. Okay, maybe something like that. But the idea of creating is when you use the knowledge in a new way, never been used before. And so these words below it is that we typically use these words when we write up a learning goal here. But these words make a connection to this over here through these different categories. So when you evaluate, when you agree or disagree, you are saying you want people to evaluate, let's say, Holland's theory, or you want them to evaluate the type of resources you're matching with a particular, let's say, student problem. Now, the other way that this is important is the way we end up by using, again, the quizzes. And so when we go back here and we look at the quizzes, remember what I said about the first one here? If the first one here is just asking for a definition, isn't that just remembering? And if we end up by asking people to apply it to a career, then we're showing that they have understanding because they're applying it. And here, when I asked them just for their 3 Holland codes, that's very simple. That's just back to information. But at the end of the day, what I've done is I've used this technique here to bump up some of the learning, which hopefully is, again, in my areas here that I've established as goals. Now, if that's the cognitive one, this would be the value one. And if you're familiar with the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and how many of you are? Oops. How many of you are familiar with the Myers-Briggs type indicator, MBTI, or Carl Jung's theory of psych? Okay, Kate, is good. Great. The reason I ask is if you're familiar with this one to an extent, what you're going to be familiar with is this distinction. If you're familiar with Myers-Briggs type indicator, you know that one of the components within rational function is thinking and feeling. And so with thinking and feeling, they're both rational approaches. And people say, well, how could they both be rational? If you look at the affective, it's not only about making value decisions, it's reacting emotionally to relationships. And how can that be? Well, let's get back to that. Because I think that when we look at this, when we're valuing, we start at the very bottom. And valuing is when we are in our environment and we receive or respond to specific type of stimuli. In other words, we're practicing a term that a lot of people were using the last couple of years and thinking it's just wonderful, mindfulness. You got to pay attention, intentionality. You know, if you don't pay attention, you're not going to be learning. So the first thing you got to do is receive and respond. So with lessons, you're trying to think how can I get students engaged. The valuing part, or even advisors, and in our cases, advisors and faculty members, valuing is when we make choices. Okay. I had a ham sandwich for lunch, not a turkey. Choice. Big deal, right? Not that big of a choice. It's not that important, unless you're probably the turkey or pig. But otherwise, you know, it's fine. You know, it's what you do. What we end up by doing here, though, is the further up we go with the affective, what we end up by doing is we organize our values in different type of conceptual groupings. And these can be typically very broad. Let me give you an example, politics. In politics, let's say people can be on a continuum of being liberal or conservative. And we may end up by developing a set of values around those notions of being more conservative or liberal, or basing our politics more on the protection of individual liberties or protection of the community. These are very dimensions that people have, and a lot of times what we'll respond to in a situation is maybe in a more of an ideological way with these value sets. But then you start pushing people. For example, let's say liberal or conservative. Let's say and I'm not trying to pick on anyone who was raising corn, but of course here in the States, one of the things that we have with many of our crops are that they're subsidized. And so you go up to a voter who might be having a background in that area, and they may say, well, you know, I'm against socialism, and therefore I'm against the Affordable Care Act. And you go, okay, that's maybe socialism to you, but aren't farm subsidies also socialism? And so here we have a value that is being said, and then all of a sudden we have to go back here and we have to start analyzing why they're similar and why they're different. So what we do is we jump back and forth between valuing and thinking. An example with a student. The student may come in and say, I know this has never happened to you. Okay, why are you wanting to go to this particular career? And the student responds, because I know it makes a lot of money. And you go, okay, are you particularly good at engineering? Oh yeah, why? Well, my Uncle Lou was one. And so Uncle Lou told me to go in this direction. Okay, well, what are some of the things that you need to look at in order to be a good engineer? And so you go down this path of saying, you know, the original choice for a particular academic program was based on a value set. But now we have to understand more about what makes that up and how to become one, and whether or not those parts are still within that value structure. So that's another one. Let me just pause there because the affective one sometimes is a little bit more difficult to understand. Does that make sense? That as we move up, we're having people make value decisions, ethical and moral decisions. Does that make sense? I'm seeing a few replies over here. That's good. The other thing I would add about the value one, and I think this is particularly pertinent to training. Our practice is based upon constantly making value choices when we interact with students. If a student came in and he or she looked like, you know, they've been up all night, you smelled alcohol on their breath, and they tell you that they aren't doing really well, they don't get along with their roommate, and are failing all their classes, they think this term, they want to withdraw. The question is, what issue do you start addressing? What is the first one you go after? And that first one you go after shows a value choice within practice. It's based upon experience. It's based upon what you know from the past. It's applying it, but you're making a choice here. So when you're looking at those particular triggers of why somebody would do something and be involved with it, how do you react to those student triggers and decide what course of action to begin with? And that is valuing. Okay, does that make sense? So one activity could well be, if you're looking at relationships, is how do you end up by addressing which set of complex situations first and having people justify it, which might be introducing the theory of Bloom's taxonomy, the affective mode, just as a thought. So here are some of the ideas of receiving, responding, valuing, organizing, and characterization by set. So as you see, it may become more complex as you move down in terms of paying attention, making choices, and ethical and value decisions. And the last one here is psychomotor. And a lot of times people don't believe we use these as much, but we do in advising. And these type of movements start out with reflex action, and they move up to basic fundamental movements, and then physical abilities, skill movements, and non-discursive. There's 2 or 3 ways of describing this. You know, the bottom level here are things that are involuntary responses. But as we become more gifted and talented in our use of our affective and also our cognitive abilities, we move with a certain amount of skill and grace, aesthetics almost. And I would make comparison to somebody who might play golf, plays golf very well on the pro set. And I've said before, if you've ever seen me play golf, I am not on the pro set. I do not swing the golf club in such a way that people will go, ah, over. More like ooh, but not ah. And so what they'll look at is the way I end up by swinging the golf club and say, George, stick to your college job. All right. Likewise, if you end up by going up this ladder here, the other area would be possibly people in the theater and the arts. Think about it. A good actor or actress, through totally showing different type of emotions on their faces, can bring you to tears or to laughter. Now that's practice. That's the art of acting. And so the other side of this coin is, for us, would be also looking at the entire idea of what are your nonverbals when you interact with the student. Okay? How many times do you have to bite your cheeks when you sometimes hear a student? And if the student sees you biting your cheeks because you're hearing them, that's probably not a very good nonverbal, all right? What you want to be able to do is sit back and just take it in, show empathy, move forward and go down that path. So this is another one where we can take a look at. And the only other thing I would mention here is that this is also a good activity for the way we use technology. Okay? How skilled are we at using it and moving forward? So all of these at the end of the day, I don't know why that popped up, pardon me, at the end of the day can play part in terms of this area here and under quizzes and functions and feedbacks and different things. What I would like to propose here is the activities itself. And all of these, to me, reflect that whatever thing you start out with you want to teach, you got to find some way to get people involved and to react to it. So what might be some good things that you've experienced in the past that were good training methods? So let me stop sharing here and just ask that in general. What would be some of those things that you've been engaged in the past that might be brought forward here to be good for training? Anyone?
I'm just trying to think of how to answer that.
Okay.
Are you talking student experiences?
Mm-hmm. One of the things I like to bring forward here is that, for example, have you ever used a case study of a student? If you're training advisors, you have them react to the case study. And so what you can do is take multiple perspectives. You take it from a conceptual, theoretical perspective. You might want to look at it from a perspective of, let's share here, the competencies. If we look at the competencies, you can come up with a complex case study and ask people to apply a theory that might be appropriate, what might be the curricular issues and options, what might be the policy, procedures, and rules, and how it would impact. And so what you can begin to do is possibly pull some of these together. And that could be the step-by-step process too, in which you do some scaffolding. You keep on using the same case study, and each time you go back to it, okay, let's look at it through the perspective of values or of concept. Then let's look at it through a curriculum. How do you end up by developing the relationship component to it? So case studies might be one approach. What else could be a possible one along those lines? Or other ways you can represent a case study. What are some other ways you might be able to represent a case study? Have any of you ever reacted to role playing done by video? And that might have actually recording students at your institution coming up with a problem and using those videos in your training, or possibly having people role play is another nice example. Another thing that people can certainly use with this, because this is training for advisors, is to look at NACADA, look at the clearinghouse, look at the publications that we have, the journal. Is there a good journal article that maybe addresses either the core values or a particular theory, and have people react to that particular journal, article, or resource that is found? Okay, all those are possibilities. So basically, if you get some type of content like this, and you're coming up here with the idea of how does this particular core competency, what is the impact of using this core competency to understand better this content? You begin to put yourself into a position where it becomes easier to start using those different levels of Bloom's taxonomy, because you're having people react to it, you're having people make choices, you're having people analyze, and you're asking them how they would apply it, create to their situation in working with a student. Okay? So anything along those lines, if you can get them to react to something, is a positive way of pulling them in and having them respond to it. So let me pause there. Any questions on that? Okay?
No, I'm good.
But do you feel comfortable with that?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording, and that way if you have any other questions, we can address them, okay?